Marcus Aldine was 44 years old, and for 19 years he had believed his mother was the woman who held what remained of his family together after his father died. He had believed it the way a man believes in the floor beneath his feet, not because he tested it every morning, not because he ran the numbers against the alternatives. Because he had been walking on it his entire life, and it had never once given way. And there are things you trust not because you verified them, but because the act of doubting them would require you to doubt everything else that rests on top of them. And Marcus was not a man who had the room for that kind of reconstruction in the middle of the life he was already living. He had watched her hold the family together with both hands, starting the morning his father died and not stopping for 19 years. She had stood in the October rain outside the church in a black wool coat, shaking the hands of 212 people, most of whom Marcus had never seen before, keeping the receiving line moving with the ease of a woman performing a role she had been preparing for in some private part of herself, long before the occasion required it. She had sorted Raymond Aldine's papers within 4 days of the funeral, stacking manila folders on the kitchen table with the precision of a person who already knows what is in each folder before she opens it. She had called the attorney and handled every piece of the estate coordination herself. She had told Marcus that the liquid assets came to $340,000, that probate would take between 18 months and 2 years, that his sister Denise's portion was being held in a separate account earning interest, and that he did not need to worry about any of the details. Marcus had been 25 years old and was working 60-hour weeks at the rail yard, trying to keep the job he had started 8 months before his father died. And he had accepted all of it without requesting a single document, because this was his mother, and because the wall was holding, and because he did not yet know the difference between a load-bearing structure and one that only looks like it. He was 44 now, shift supervisor on the night freight line. He knew the difference. He was carrying a bag of oranges up his mother's porch steps on a Sunday morning in February when he found a man in a gray overcoat already standing at the door. The man was old, 70 or older. He had the upright, considered posture of someone who had spent 4 decades in a profession where how you carried yourself was a signal about how seriously you took what you were doing. He looked at Marcus with an expression Marcus could not categorize immediately, because it held several recognizable things inside it without being any one of them. Not quite surprise, though something of surprise was there. Not grief, though that was present too. Not warmth, exactly, but something that lived near warmth. And underneath all 3 of those things, in the way an undertone lives beneath a surface note, something that looked very much like relief. The man pressed a folded note into Marcus's free hand. He did not introduce himself. He did not explain. He nodded once and walked back down the porch steps and got into his car and drove away. And Marcus stood on the porch with the bag of oranges in one arm and the folded note in the other hand, and watched the car reach the corner and turn out of sight. He looked down at the note. 4 words. Careful, old-fashioned ballpoint pen. The deliberate loops of a man who had learned to write when penmanship was still taught as a discipline worth developing. Don't sign anything she gives you. Marcus read it twice. The February cold was in his face. He thought about the expression on the man's face, the specific quality of it, the look of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has finally arrived at the place where setting it down is possible and right. He folded the note. He put it inside his jacket, pressed against his chest. He rang the doorbell. What Marcus Aldine did in the 11 weeks that followed would take apart 19 years of construction his mother had believed was permanently beyond reach. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is going to stay with you for a very long time. Marcus's father had been a machinist, 33 years on the floor of the same fabrication plant, starting as a floor hand at 23 and ending as a lead operator when he retired at 60. A trajectory that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with the refusal to do a job halfway. Raymond Aldean was the kind of man whose hands told the entire story of his working life without him having to say a word about it. The base of his right thumb carried a raised scar from a press vault in 1979 that he had stopped noticing sometime around 1983. Both hands had the permanent stiffness of someone who had worked in metal and cold for 30 years, without apology and without complaint. He wore the same 2 pairs of work boots in alternating rotation, had them resoled when the soles wore through, and did not see any reason to replace what was still holding its shape and doing its job correctly. He had retired at 60 with partial hearing loss in his left ear, a pension that covered what he needed without surplus, and the specific quiet satisfaction that belongs to people who spent their years building things that held and who knew it. He was a quiet man, in the best sense of that phrase. Not cold, not withholding. Quiet the way a well-calibrated instrument is quiet. It expresses what it needs to express, correctly and without excess. He paid every debt on time. He went to the same barber every 6 weeks and left a $4 tip, which had been 20% in 1986 and was still exactly 20% in 2003. Because Raymond did not see any reason to change what was already correct. He attended his daughter Denise's soccer games when she was 12 and 13, stood on the sideline in his work coat without shouting or performing enthusiasm, and Denise said years later that she had always known exactly where he was on that sideline, because he was the one standing the most still. He had died on a Thursday in early October from a second heart attack that the first one had made, if not certain, then far more likely. The first had come 18 months earlier and taken close to half his cardiac function and turned him, without drama or self-pity, into a man who moved with more deliberateness and rested more often, and had gone to see his attorney 3 months before the second one arrived. The second came early in the morning, before anyone could reach him, and the paramedics who found him at 6:43 found him in his kitchen, already dressed in his work clothes, which meant he had been up early and had intended somewhere to be that day. Raymond Aldean did not put on his work clothes unless he had a purpose for them. Marcus had been 25. He had driven to the hospital in the October dark and stood in a corridor and identified his father. And then he had driven to Denise's apartment and brought her back to their mother's house. And the 3 of them had sat in the kitchen for a while in the particular silence of people who are not yet ready to speak about what has just happened. His mother had been the one to call the funeral home. The one to coordinate the church and the obituary and the headstone order, which she paid in full in advance so that Marcus would not need to deal with that detail later. He had helped where he was directed to help and had trusted everything else to her because she was his mother, and because the grief was very large, and because trusting her cost him nothing he could feel at 25. Denise had died 8 months after Raymond. A car accident on a wet highway in June, a Tuesday night. A curve on a road she had driven 100 times before. She was 22 years old. Marcus had stood in a hospital corridor for the second time in less than a year and felt the arithmetic of grief arrange itself in a way that was going to be permanent. The number of people who held his entire story from the beginning was going to keep getting smaller, and there was nothing available to him that changed that rate. He had planned Denise's funeral the way he had helped with his father's. He filed the paperwork, he handled the calls, he took the necessary days off the rail yard job and went back to it when those days were over, because going back to work was the only thing that made sense as a next step. His mother was still there. The kitchen was the same. The coffee was the same temperature every Sunday morning. He told himself for 19 years that this was enough, and he told himself it with enough consistency that the gap between what he was telling himself and what was true did not surface very often. He was a shift supervisor now, 9 years in the role, responsible for 11 crew members and 4 miles of freight track on the Nightline. His skill, the one that had earned him 2 promotions and the sustained respect of every crew he had ever run, was the ability to read a mechanical system in motion and locate where it was running on tolerance rather than genuine strength. He could walk a freight car and feel a stressed coupling before it announced itself as a failure. He could hear the sound a rail made under load when something about the load was subtly wrong. This was not instinct in any mystical sense. It was pattern recognition built from thousands of hours of sustained attention over 9 years, the trained capacity of a man who had learned that small deviations are always the advance notice of large failures, and that the correct time to act is in the small deviation, not after. He had a daughter named Nadia. She was 21 years old, living in her own apartment on the east side of town, working the front desk at a physical therapy clinic while she saved money for a nursing program she intended to start in the fall. She had her grandfather's eyes. She had her Aunt Denise's restlessness, the quality of a person who is always slightly ahead of the moment they are in, looking toward the next one. She had inherited from some combination of both of them, skipping the generation that no longer included them, a specific belief that family required active maintenance and did not hold together on momentum alone. She called Marcus on Sunday mornings to confirm he was eating meals, and on Wednesday nights because she did not like the thought of him running the Nightline without anyone knowing where he was and what time he expected to be home. She was the reason Marcus still drove to his mother's house every Sunday with groceries, because she had asked him to keep doing it, because she could not always get there herself, and because Marcus had agreed without making it a conversation. There was a book on his nightstand. A historical novel about a land surveyor in the American West in the 1870s, a man whose professional life consisted entirely of establishing where the real boundary actually fell between one piece of land and another, often in territories where the previous surveys had been done badly or with deliberate dishonesty for the benefit of parties who stood to gain from the error. Marcus had been stuck on page 187 of that book for 4 months. He read the same 4 or 5 pages most nights before he fell asleep, and started them again the following night. And the surveyor in the novel was always at the same point, standing at the edge of a disputed boundary line with his instruments and his carefully maintained field records, unable to move forward because he did not yet have the one piece of accurate measurement that would allow the rest of the survey to resolve. Marcus had decided at some point that the book would finish itself when it was ready, and had stopped trying to push it. The Sunday in February had started the way all his Sundays started. He stopped at the grocery store he always used, bought the things his mother needed that she would not mention needing, drove the 11 minutes to her house, and was carrying the bag up her porch steps when Gerald Price pressed the note into his hand and changed the shape of the next 11 weeks. Inside the kitchen, his mother poured the coffee and set the cups on the table, and Marcus sat down across from her and set the oranges on the counter and watched her. She was talking about the neighbor 2 houses to the left who had installed a fence 6 inches over the property line, a dispute that had been generating this same amount of conversation since the previous August. She talked with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent a great deal of her life learning to fill silence before it could become a question. Her hands were not still. She straightened the stack of mail on the counter, which was already as straight as it needed to be. She stood at the kitchen window without apparent purpose for a moment, and then came back and moved the ceramic sugar bowl approximately 1 inch to the left. She asked about Nadia's schedule. She asked whether Marcus was sleeping enough. She did not mention the man who had been at her door. When Marcus mentioned him, as if he had just remembered it, describing him as an older man in a gray overcoat who had been standing at the door when Marcus arrived, his mother's hands paused for exactly 2 seconds before she reached for her coffee cup. The pause was small. It was the pause of someone processing information they had not expected to need to processing it faster than they wanted it to appear they were processing it. Marcus had been reading those pauses in freight systems and in people for 9 years. He knew precisely what they meant. They meant a load being managed rather than disclosed. She said she had no idea who that could be. She asked what the man had looked like. Marcus described him accurately. He kept his voice at its everyday pitch and watched her face the entire time, and what he saw was the careful, controlled effort of a woman deciding in real time how much of what she already knew to perform as not knowing. She said it sounded like it could be anyone, maybe a solicitor. She changed the subject to Nadia's apartment and whether the building management was responsive. Marcus drove home and put the note on his kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. Then he opened his phone and searched for the attorney who had handled his father's estate. Gerald Price was not difficult to find, licensed in the state for 47 years with a clean disciplinary record throughout. Semi-retired, maintaining a 2-person practice on the 4th floor of a building in the center of the city. His name appeared on Raymond Aldean's public probate filing as the attorney of record, which Marcus located in 8 minutes. The firm's website was plain and not recently updated, but carried a working phone number at the bottom of the page. Marcus called Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Before he could give his name, Price said, "Mr. Aldean, I have been hoping you would call." They met Wednesday afternoon in an office that had the specific quality of a room where serious things had been done for a very long time, by people who did not feel the need to make them look more impressive than they were. The shelves held decades of organized case files with hand-lettered identification on the spines. The desk was clear, except for one manila folder and 2 ceramic mugs of coffee that Price had arranged before Marcus arrived, because he was a man who thought about what a meeting required before the meeting began. He was, in person, exactly who he had appeared to be on the porch steps, a man whose purpose was fully settled, who had been waiting for this specific conversation for a long time, and who had no interest in being anything other than direct about it. He opened the folder and placed the first page in front of Marcus without preamble. "Your father's estate," he said, "was not $340,000. Marcus looked at the page. "What was it?" "The liquid portion alone, at the time of probate," Price said, "was $682,000. The house, which your father owned outright, and which was assessed at market value that year, brought the total estate to just under $900,000. Marcus let the number settle before responding to it. He had learned over 9 years of shift supervision that the first action when a number contradicts what you have been told is to confirm the number, not to react to it. "My mother told me 340. Your mother was the executor of the estate. She held full legal authority over the distribution. Your father's will specified 1/3 to his spouse, 1/3 to you, and 1/3 to your sister Denise, with a provision that in the event of Denise's death without surviving children, her portion would fund a trust your father and I established together 3 months before his death. He called it the Raymond Aldean Educational Trust. It was established for a specific named beneficiary. A person he knew about, a person he had named deliberately and specifically." He turned the page. "Your sister's daughter. Her name is Cora Denise Aldean." Marcus looked at the document turned toward him. A county record's birth certificate, printed on plain copy paper. Mother, Denise Aldean. Father, unknown. Child, Cora Denise Aldean. Date of birth in the standard records field. He read the date. He did the subtraction without paper or hesitation. 7 months before Denise died. "When my mother filed the probate representation," Marcus said, keeping his voice at its working weight, "the representation that Denise had no surviving children. She presented a sworn affidavit and a physician's certification, both attesting that Denise Aldean had died without dependents or surviving issue. The documentation was properly formatted in all visible respects. I had no independent reason at that time to verify it against the birth records. The probate closed on the basis of what was presented." Price looked at Marcus across the desk. I have thought about that many times in the 19 years since. The trust, Marcus said, was funded at Denise's full 1/3 share and has been administered under your mother's sole authority as trustee for 19 years, invested conservatively, as your father directed. He placed a third document on the desk between them, a trust account summary with the current balance printed at the bottom. The present value of the trust is approximately $1,390,000. The building's ventilation system ran quietly. Outside the window, the city went about its Wednesday afternoon. Marcus looked at the number on the trust summary and thought about Cora Denise Aldine, who had been 7 months old when her mother died, and was 20 years old now, and had been alive and present in the world this entire time, inside a family that had filed her out of the record before she was old enough to know records existed. 2 months ago, Price continued, the trust administrator notified me that your mother had submitted a dissolution filing. She is seeking to liquidate the trust assets and transfer them to a personal account in her name. As the eldest surviving Aldine, you are listed as the eligible co-signer on the dissolution paperwork. He looked at Marcus steadily. She has not told you any of this is happening. No, Marcus said. She has not. I was your father's attorney for 23 years, Price said. I was in this office with him when he drafted those trust provisions and named Cora specifically. I heard the way he said her name. There is a way that people say a name when they are trying to make it permanent, trying to make sure it survives them. And your father said Cora's name in that way. He closed the folder. I could not stand at that door and say nothing to you. I hope you understand why. Marcus picked up the coffee mug. It was warm against both palms. He held it and watched the steam slow and thin while he thought about his father in this room, 3 months before the second heart attack, naming a child he wanted protected. He thought about his mother in this same office on a different day, signing the executor documents with that child's name already in the file, already knowing exactly what she was going to do about it. He held the mug for 12 minutes without speaking. The coffee went cold. He set it down. I need copies of everything in that folder, he said. Already made, Price said, and slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Marcus drove home and placed the envelope in the metal lockbox he kept under his bed, alongside his father's Navy discharge papers and the deed to his apartment. He had not opened that box in more than a year. He locked it again after the envelope was inside and sat on the edge of the bed in the Wednesday evening quiet and thought about the load tolerance of what he was about to do and about where to begin. He had a method on the freight line for moments when incoming information was too large to process in total at once. He broke it into the smallest piece that could be confirmed or contradicted by a single verifiable action. He did not try to see the full system before the pieces were in place. He confirmed the piece directly in front of him and moved to the next one. He had been applying this method for 9 years, and it had not failed him. He applied it now. He called Rochelle Timms in the morning. Rochelle was a paralegal he had worked with on 2 previous occasions, once during a liability dispute at the rail yard that required document tracing across 4 jurisdictions, and once when a crew member's workers' compensation claim had been improperly denied, and Marcus had helped him locate someone competent to untangle it. She was 41 years old and ran a document research practice from a shared office on the east side of town, and was competent in the specific visible way of people who have never had the luxury of pretending otherwise. She answered her phone on the second ring at 8:30 in the morning, asked 2 clarifying questions about the trust account number and the trust administrator of record, and said she would start that afternoon. He also called Nadia. He told her he was looking into some things about her grandfather's estate and needed her not to mention anything to her grandmother until he told her it was time. Nadia was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough for Marcus to understand that she was already somewhere further along in the implications than he had yet stated out loud. She said, "Call me when you know more." He bought a yellow legal pad at the drugstore 2 blocks from his apartment on Thursday morning and started the first page with the date in the upper left corner, the trust account number, and a heading he wrote in the same block print he used for shift anomaly documentation. What I know, what I still need. He drew a vertical line down the center of each page, confirmed facts on the left side, open questions on the right, wide margins throughout. He had used this exact format for 9 years on the freight line. It organized information without requiring him to pretend he had answers before the answers were confirmed. Rochelle's first report came by email at 6:17 Thursday evening, 1 hour before his shift began. He read it at the kitchen table with the yellow notepad open beside him. The trust account had operated under his mother's sole administration since the estate closed 19 years ago. She had taken 4 discretionary distributions to herself as trustee compensation across the full period, totaling $81,000. Each distribution fell within the allowable annual percentage for a trust of the account size, legal in form, standard on paper. What Rochelle had flagged was a pattern in the investment subaccount records that was neither standard nor clearly legal. Money had moved from the trust's growth account into a holding account at irregular intervals across the 19-year period, not withdrawn from the trust, cycled. Moved into the holding account and held there for periods ranging from 11 days to 6 weeks, and then returned to the main trust account without any documented fiduciary rationale. 9 separate transfers, no investment purpose attached to any of them, no advisory notes, no record of what each movement was for or what it accomplished for the trust's beneficiary. At the bottom of the report, Rochelle had written in the plain, declarative style she used for everything, "This pattern warrants a forensic accountant. I can recommend one." Marcus wrote the number 9 on the left side of the notepad and circled it. 9 internal transfers, no documented purpose. He went to work. He supervised his crew. He walked his 4 miles of track at 11:15 the way he did every shift, and listened for the deviation that preceded the failure and did not find one that night. He drove home at 7 in the morning, ate breakfast, slept 5 hours, and woke up to an urgent flagged email from Rochelle. She had pulled the full dissolution filing documentation and found a secondary beneficiary designation on the personal account where the liquidated trust funds were directed to land. The designation had been added to the account 14 months ago. The name on it was Gordon Aldine, residential address in Sarasota, Florida. Marcus wrote the name on a clean page of the yellow notepad. He did not recognize it. He had not grown up knowing his mother had a brother. He had not grown up knowing his mother had a brother because his mother had never mentioned one. He wrote that on the right side of the page. Name unknown before today. Never mentioned. Rochelle confirmed the relationship by noon. Gordon Aldine, 67 years old, 3 years younger than Patricia. Retired, living in a condominium in Sarasota for 11 years. Prior residential address within 15 miles of Patricia's house for most of his adult life before the Florida move. Marcus had grown up 15 miles from an uncle he had never been told existed. He wrote that on the left side of the page and underlined it once. He did not make it a larger thought than it needed to be. It was a confirmed fact. He wrote it down and moved to the next question on the right side of the page, which was, what did Gordon know and when, and what had he done about it? He called Gordon Aldine on a Tuesday evening from the supervisor's landline at the rail yard, using a number Gordon would not have in any contact list. He introduced himself accurately, Marcus Aldine, Patricia's son. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Gordon said, "How did you find this number?" "I'm calling from it," Marcus said. "You don't know my number. I know yours." He kept his voice at its working weight. "Your name appears on the secondary beneficiary designation for a personal account my mother is setting up to receive the assets from my grandfather's trust when she dissolves it. I need to ask you one question, and I'm asking you to be straight with me about it. Did you know about Cora?" This pause was the longest of the conversation, and it had a quality the others did not have. It was not the silence of calculation. It was not the silence of a man deciding how much to reveal. It was the silence of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for a very long time, and who has finally reached the point where someone is offering to take it from him. "She called me when Denise died," Gordon said. "Said there was estate paperwork that needed a family notarization. Mailed me an affidavit form. Told me it was standard, just confirming that Denise hadn't left dependents." He stopped. "I signed it and mailed it back. I didn't read it carefully enough. Did you know at that point that Denise had a daughter?" "No. I found out about 2 years later. Someone mentioned something at a family gathering. I called Patricia. She said the child had been placed with a relative, that it was all handled, and that I should not bring it up again." A pause. "I did not bring it up again. That was 17 years ago." Marcus wrote on the left side of the notepad, "New from year 2, signed original affidavit without full reading. She added you as beneficiary on the receiving account 14 months ago," Marcus said. "She called and said she was updating some financial documents and wanted to make sure I was provided for in them. I told her I did not want anything that wasn't legitimately mine. She said it was all properly handled and there was nothing to worry about." A shorter pause. "I knew it wasn't." "It isn't," Marcus said. The sound of Gordon's apartment came through the phone, a television at low volume in another room, the quiet hum of an air conditioner. Then Gordon said, in the voice of a man who has been carrying something for 17 years and has finally arrived at the place where setting it down is both right and possible, "What do you need from me?" "A voluntary written statement to the estate attorney," Marcus said, "describing what you signed, what you were told it was at the time, and what you came to understand afterward." Gordon said, without negotiating and without a pause, "I'll do it." Marcus thanked him and ended the call and wrote 3 words on the left side of the notepad under Gordon's entry: cooperating, voluntary, used. He drew a line under the 3 words and turned to a clean page. The estate attorney was Carla Siebert. He found her through a professional referral from a colleague at the rail yard who had used her in a contested business matter 2 years earlier and described her as a woman who had spent 20 years watching families do systematic financial damage to one another over inheritance disputes, and who had become extremely precise about the gap between what was legal in form and what was legal in substance. Marcus brought her the complete folder at their first meeting, every document Price had provided, and every report Rochelle had delivered, organized by category in labeled sections using his block print shift report system. He set it on her desk and sat back. She read for 52 minutes. The original misrepresentation to the probate court regarding Cora Aldine's existence, supported by the physician certification, combined with 19 years of sole trustee administration and this dissolution filing, constitutes fraud on the court. That is not a civil matter handled by estate litigation. It is a criminal one. She said it plainly, as a structural fact, without inflation. Marcus wrote it on the yellow notepad, word for word. She also told him about Owen Masley, whose name appeared on Denise's death certification, and whose disciplinary record she had encountered in other contexts, a physician who had provided medical certifications and legal documentation without adequate examination of the underlying records or subjects. 2 prior complaints in the years immediately following Denise's death, both citing the same pattern of conduct. Neither complaint had resulted in formal action in isolation. The cumulative record had triggered the 2011 review that ended in voluntary surrender. The surrender grounds cited, providing certifications used to misrepresent an individual's status in legal proceedings. Denise had died in 2005. The conduct that eventually cost Masley his license had been in active practice at the time Patricia had needed a death certification that would hold in probate court. How his mother had known to find Masley, Marcus would never fully establish. He did not need to. He was a shift supervisor who worked with the evidence in front of him and moved forward from that. He told Carla he needed to do one more thing before she filed the freeze petition. She said she would have everything ready the moment he called. He drove 41 miles north on a Saturday morning in early April. He had found Cora through a local business profile piece that had named her in a staff spotlight. He had not called ahead. He took the state highway north and found the store, and sat in the parking lot for 23 minutes before he went in. He was not there yet to introduce himself. He was there because a folder full of confirmed facts about a person was not the same as knowing whether that person was real in the world, in the way that made the work worth the doing. His father had said her name in a room with Gerald Price and asked that she be protected, and Marcus was about to walk into his mother's kitchen and dismantle 19 years of careful construction on her behalf, and he needed to see her first, because what he was doing was not primarily about the documentation. It was about the person his father had named. Cora was at the far end of the service counter when he went in. She was helping a customer read the fine print on a package of fasteners, leaning forward slightly without being asked, in the unhurried manner of someone who had already decided that doing the job well was its own reason, and did not need prompting. She had Denise's jaw. She had Raymond Aldean's stillness in how she moved and stood, the economy of motion of a person who does not spend energy that is not required. She was 20 years old, and she worked that hardware store floor with the ease of someone who had learned it properly and had decided it was worth knowing well. Marcus bought a package of wood screws he did not need, paid in cash at the far register, and left. He sat in the truck for a few minutes. He thought about Cora at 7 months old. He thought about his father in Price's office naming her. He thought about 19 years and what they contained and what they should have contained, but did not. He thought about the specific number his father had given her, 1/3 of $900,000 plus 19 years of compounded interest, which had become $1.39 million, all of it sitting under his mother's sole authority for the entire time. The second thing Rochelle sent, which arrived on Friday morning while Marcus was sleeping after his shift, was a deeper financial history of the trust account, going back to its origination. She had requested the full investment transaction log from the administrator, which the administrator was required to provide as part of standard due diligence documentation when a dissolution was pending. The log showed something that Marcus had not fully registered in the initial report. The 9 internal transfer events were not evenly distributed across the 19 years. They were clustered. 3 in the first 4 years after the estate closed, then a gap of nearly 7 years with no transfers at all, then 6 more in the last 8 years. The early cluster and the late cluster had different shapes. The early transfers were smaller, between $12,000 and $22,000 each, and the holding periods were longer, up to 6 weeks. The later transfers were larger, between $28,000 and $41,000 each, and the holding periods were as short as 11 days. The pattern was not random. It was iterative. It was a person who had learned, over 19 years, how to do something more efficiently. Marcus wrote this on the left side of the notepad, under a new heading, Pattern Evolution. He wrote 2 sub-entries, early period, smaller and slower, late period, larger and faster. He drew a line between the 2 sub-entries and wrote 1 word in the margin to the right of that line, practiced. He added this page to the folder. He also thought, for the first time since the meeting with Price, about the specific sequence of his mother's actions immediately after his father died. She had managed the funeral, she had sorted the papers, she had called Price, she had managed the estate, she had made the representation about Denise's daughter within 3 months of his father's death. That sequence was not the sequence of a person acting under grief. It was the sequence of a person executing a plan that had been prepared in advance, adjusting for circumstances as they arose, making each decision in the order that each decision needed to be made. He thought about the 3 months between Raymond's death and the close of the probate. He thought about his father in Price's office before that, naming Cora, asking for protection. He thought about his mother in the same office on a different occasion, signing the executor documents with full knowledge of what those documents contained. He thought about what it meant to have known while you were signing, and to have signed anyway, and to have been planning the next step while the ink was still wet. He did not think about it with anger. He thought about it the way he thought about a fault in a freight system, with the specific attention required to understand what had failed and what the failure had cost, so that the cost could be measured accurately and the fault could be corrected in the way it actually needed to be corrected, not in the way that was easiest or most available. He wrote one more entry on the left side of the notepad, on a new line below practiced. Pre-planned before Raymond died. Execution began within weeks of death. He drew a box around those two lines and closed the notepad and went to work. The parallel life Marcus ran through those 11 weeks, the surface life of shifts and crew and track walks and Sunday mornings and Nadia's Wednesday calls, was the part of the story that he would not have thought to narrate, but that mattered more than he would have admitted. He worked 60 hours a week on the nightline and kept the surface of every shift exactly as it needed to be. He walked his 4 miles of track every night at 11:15. He ate breakfast every morning after his shift and slept his 5 hours and got up and worked on the folder and went back to work. He did not talk about it at the yard. He did not bring it to the surface anywhere it did not belong. Discipline was the entire job. His father had known that. The cost of losing discipline in the middle of a problem was that the problem got handled badly, and the cost of handling this problem badly was Cora, who was 20 years old and had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for 19 years. He did not allow it to be handled badly. He drove home and called Nadia. He said, "Come to my place Saturday morning. I need to show you everything." Nadia arrived at 8:15 with 2 coffees from the shop near her apartment and sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table and read through the complete folder in silence, each page turned with care, no performance of reaction. When she reached the birth certificate, she paused for one full breath before continuing. When she reached the trust balance summary, she set the page on the table and looked at the number from a slight distance, the way you look at something when you need a moment before it becomes fully real. When she finished, she put both palms flat on the table. "Cora," she said. "Yes." Grandpa named her specifically. He said her name out loud. Price remembers the way he said it, the way a man says a name when he is trying to make it permanent. Nadia was quiet. "When I was about 12, I heard someone at a family gathering mention something about Denise having had a baby. I asked Grandma about it afterward. She went very still and changed the subject, and I told myself I must have misunderstood, and I never asked about it again." She looked at Marcus. "She held my hand at Grandpa's grave. She held my hand at Aunt Denise's grave. Both of them. Every October for 19 years. And the whole time, there was a child who belonged to both of those people, and she had erased her from the documents before the child could form a memory. She held your hand at those graves," Marcus said, "because she needed something to hold." Nadia looked at him for a moment. "I want to be there when you talk to her. I know you do." "I have earned it." "Yes," Marcus said, "you have." Carla Siebert filed the freeze petition on Wednesday morning. The trust dissolution was suspended by court order by 4 in the afternoon. Gordon Aldine's voluntary statement arrived by email Thursday, 3 pages, signed and notarized, describing in plain sequence what he had signed, what he had been told it was, and what he had later come to understand about how it had been used. Price reviewed the complete evidence file and confirmed he would be present when Marcus needed him. Marcus called his mother on Sunday afternoon. He said he could come by Thursday evening if the paperwork meeting was still on. She said Thursday was perfect. Her voice had the brightness she had been applying to her voice for 19 years, the practiced surface layer of a woman who had learned that controlling the tone of an exchange was a form of controlling its direction. He did not tell her who else was coming. Thursday evening in his mother's kitchen. The mail was on the counter. The coffee was made. She had put out a plate of butter cookies, the round pressed ones she brought out when she wanted a meeting to feel comfortable and without urgency. Her own folder was on the table to her right, 2 tabbed sections, a pen clipped to the cover. Marcus sat across from her. Nadia sat beside Marcus. His mother looked at Nadia with the expression she used to make people in a room feel welcomed and without reason to be cautious, the warm and practiced arrangement that she had deployed for 19 years of Sunday mornings and 44 years of being someone's mother. "I'm so glad you both came," she said. "This is really just a formality. There's an old trust account that needs to be formally closed, and the administrator requires a co-signature from an eligible family member, and Marcus, you are the one who qualifies for that. It's not complicated at all." She opened her folder and slid 2 pages across the table toward him. "Sign here, and we're done before the coffee finishes." Marcus did not look at the pages. He placed his folder on the table. His mother's hands went still for the 2nd time since February. "I'm not going to sign those," Marcus said. She looked up at him. "My name is Marcus Aldine," he said. His voice was the voice he used on the freight line at night, the one that did not require volume because it was already at the correct weight. "Raymond Aldine was my father. In the fall of 2005, when you closed his estate, you filed a representation with the probate court stating that Denise Aldine had died without surviving children. That was not true. Denise had a daughter named Cora Denise Aldine. She was born 7 months before Denise died. My father knew about her. He named her specifically in the trust provisions he signed with Gerald Price 3 months before his own death. He said her name out loud in Price's office, in the specific way that a man says a name when he is trying to make it permanent, when he is trying to ensure that it survives him. He asked that she be protected. He opened the folder and placed each document on the table as he named it. Birth certificate on top, trust provision with Cora's name in his father's chosen language, probate filing with his mother's signature on the executor's line, Massley's disciplinary record with the grounds for surrender, the internal transfer analysis with the 9 flagged movements, the forensic accountant's preliminary assessment, Gordon Aldine's voluntary statement, 3 pages, signed and notarized. I have documentation for every element of this. Carla Siebert has copies. Gerald Price has copies. He paused for 1 beat. Gerald Price is in the living room. He watched his mother's face. He had been reading the faces of systems under load for 9 years, freight systems and organizational structures, and the kind of systems that people build inside themselves to maintain a position they cannot sustain indefinitely. And what he saw in her face in this moment was the first honest thing he had seen there since February. Not grief, not remorse, not even surprise in the usual sense. The expression of a structure giving at the points where it was always going to give first, the places where the construction had been done for appearance rather than for genuine load-bearing capacity, yielding in the exact sequence they were built to yield. She said, "You don't understand how complicated things were at that time." "I understand what the documents show," Marcus said. "The trust freeze was filed Wednesday morning. The dissolution has been suspended by court order." Gordon provided a voluntary statement detailing what he signed and what he was told about it, and what he later came to understand. Owen Massley's disciplinary record and the grounds for his license surrender are part of the file. The preliminary forensic analysis of the 9 internal transfer movements is in that folder. What I am asking you to do tonight is call your attorney and agree to cooperate fully with the forensic audit, not for any other reason than this. Cora Denise Aldine is 20 years old. Her grandfather sat in a room with his attorney and said her name and asked that she be protected. That was deliberate and specific, and it was meant for her. The audit is the first step toward that meaning something. His mother looked at the documents spread across the table. She looked at the birth certificate, which Marcus had placed on top so it would be the first thing she saw. Cora's name, printed in standard county records type. The date of birth in the standard field. She looked at it for a long time, and Marcus watched the practiced surface of 19 years of Sunday mornings and October grave visits and kitchen conversations finally give way to the thing underneath it, which was not what most people would have expected to find there. It was not guilt, and it was not even calculation. It was something older and more exhausted than either. She looked at Nadia. Nadia had both palms flat on the table and was looking back at her grandmother with the full exact weight of someone who has been quietly revising a foundational belief for 3 weeks and is now finished with the revision. "You held my hand at Grandpa's grave," Nadia said. Her voice was precise and level, without any excess in it. "You held my hand at Aunt Denise's grave. Both of them, every October. And the whole time there was a little girl who belonged to both of those graves, and you had held her grandfather's money since before she was old enough to know money existed." His mother started to say something about the financial circumstances Raymond had not adequately considered when he drafted the trust provisions, about what she had been facing at that time with 2 losses in 8 months and no one to share the weight of it. "Please don't." The kitchen was quiet then. The coffee maker on the counter kept the pot warm. The plate of butter cookies sat untouched in the center of the table between them. Outside on the street, a car passed, and its headlights moved across the kitchen wall in a slow arc and were gone. His mother said, in the smallest voice Marcus had heard from her in 44 years of being her son, "I thought I was protecting what we had built together." "You were protecting the money," Marcus said. "They are not the same thing." She did not answer that. Gerald Price came in from the living room, and Marcus introduced him to his mother with the plain facts of why he was there, and Price sat down and began to speak, in the patient and precise voice of a man who had been a lawyer for 47 years and had been waiting 19 of them for this specific conversation to become possible, to explain in detail what the next steps would require of her. The forensic audit ran for 11 weeks. The accountant Carla Siebert retained found $214,000 across the 9 flagged internal transfer events, none with documented fiduciary purpose, 3 falling within 2-week windows of significant personal expenditures in Patricia Aldine's financial records. The Masley documentation and the connection between his surrender grounds and the probate certification were referred to the state attorney's office. Patricia Aldine's attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement that included full restitution to the trust, surrender of all trustee authority, and a formal acknowledgement filed with the probate court correcting the original misrepresentation about Cora's existence and her legal status as a trust beneficiary. The trust was reinstated in full under court-appointed independent administration. $1,389,000 plus the restituted $214,000 transferred into a supervised trust account in the name of Cora Denise Aldine on a Thursday afternoon in early June. Carla Siebert filed the formal notice. Gerald Price received his copy at the office on the 4th floor and called Marcus that evening to confirm it was done, in the quiet voice of a man who had been waiting 19 years to make that call. Marcus drove 41 miles north the following Saturday morning. He went inside this time. Cora was at the service counter. She looked up when he walked toward her, giving him the same full, unhurried attention she gave every person who came to that counter. He told her his name. He told her Raymond Aldine had been his father. He told her Denise Aldine had been his sister. He watched the sentence reach her face in the quiet, settling way of something that has been true for a long time and has only now been said out loud to the person it concerns. She did not have the expression of someone receiving news. She had the expression of someone receiving the specific word that makes a sentence they have been carrying for a long time finally resolve. She said, "Someone from the attorney's office called me last week about a trust in my name." "That was my attorney," Marcus said. "I have been working on this since February." She looked at him. She had her grandfather's eyes, the same economy of attention in them, the same quality of looking at something until you have seen it correctly, rather than looking only until you have confirmed what you expected. "Why did you do it?" she said. "Because your grandfather named you," Marcus said. "He sat across from his attorney 3 months before he died and said your name out loud." He said it in a specific way that his attorney remembered, the way a man says a name when he's trying to make it permanent and protected. He meant it for you specifically. It took 19 years longer than it should have, and I am sorry for that part. But you were always in the documents. You were never gone from the places where it was his handwriting. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the measured voice that had traveled a generation and arrived intact, "Will you tell me about him, your father?" Marcus said yes. They sat in the break room for an hour and 23 minutes, and Marcus told her about Raymond Aldine the way you tell someone about a person who deserved to be fully known. The 33 years on the same fabrication floor. The $4 tip at the barber every 6 weeks because the percentage was right and the percentage did not need to change. The way he stood at Denise's soccer games, always the same spot on the sideline, always the one standing most still. The work clothes already on at 6:43 in the morning because he had somewhere to be that day and had intended to be ready for it. The particular quality of his silence, which was not the absence of something, but the presence of a man who did not spend what he did not need to spend, and who gave everything he spent its full weight. Nadia drove up the following Saturday and met Cora in the parking lot outside a coffee shop on the east side of the county, and Marcus sat across from both of them at a small table and watched them find the family resemblance without being told where to look. The jaw, the eyes. The way they both went entirely still when they were listening to something that mattered. The specific inherited stillness that Raymond Aldine had given his children and that had traveled through Denise into Cora without any trustee to administer it and without any executor's signature to authorize it, arriving in the next generation completely whole and completely recognizable. Marcus drove home that Sunday evening on the highway with the windows down. The yellow legal pad was in the back seat. Every page was filled. The left columns were dense with confirmed facts, and the right columns were empty for the first time since February. He got home and ate dinner, and sat in the chair by the window with the historical novel from his nightstand. He read past page 187 for the first time in 4 months. He read 43 pages before he stopped, and in those pages, the land surveyor in the novel finally positioned his instruments correctly, on the actual ground, and took the actual measurements, and drew the boundary line where it genuinely fell, not where the previous surveys had placed it, and not where the interested parties had needed it to fall, but where the ground itself said it was. He set the book down with the spine open at the page he had reached. Cora Aldine had her grandfather's eyes and her grandfather's stillness, and she had come by both of them honestly, through blood, through the specific kind of inheritance that no executor's signature and no fraudulent physician certification and no 19 years of careful sole trustee administration could reach. It was in the jaw and the eyes and the quality of the attention, and it had survived everything that had been done to erase it, because that is what the things a person actually gives their children do. They survive. They travel forward through the people they are given to, and they arrive in the next generation, still recognizable, still whole, still the thing that was intended. Raymond had put it in her. Patricia had spent 19 years and $1.3 million trying to own what Raymond had built, rather than passing it forward the way he had written it down and signed his name to it and said it out loud to a man who kept careful records and who had been waiting the whole time to see it delivered. She ended up with neither the money nor the thing the money was always meant to carry. The money was Cora's now. It had always been Cora's. That was what Raymond had written and signed and said in a room with a good attorney in the right voice, asking for the right protection. And it turned out that a thing a man says in the right room, in the right voice, asking for someone to be protected, is not the kind of thing that can be permanently erased by someone who only ever wanted to own what it was protecting. It was just the kind of thing that needed someone willing to go looking